Thanks, Alexa. Hi, everyone. My name is Annika. I am a senior and, like Alexa mentioned, one of the co-presidents of the Pre-Law Society. I'm studying economics and social policy analysis, and I'm at McMurtry College. So without further ado, I'd like to ask the panelists to introduce themselves. So maybe we can start with Alicia.
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Alicia Burns-Wright. I practice law and live in DC, but I'm actually in the Outer Banks, North Carolina for now. I decided to escape for a month, escape the cold in DC for a month. So that's where I'm dialing in from. I'm currently an Associate General Counsel of Competition and Regulatory at Facebook. I joined last year in June. Before that, I was at the Federal Trade Commission for 3.5 years doing the same type of work, investigating mergers. And prior to that, I was at Vincent and Elkins DC office for about 5 years. I went to Harvard Law School directly after I graduated from Rice. So I graduated from Rice in 2008, graduated from Harvard in 2011. And I'm excited to be here and talk to you guys today. Oh, and I was at Jones College.
Thanks, Alicia. Joy?
Hi, everybody. My name is Joy Green. I'm an immigration attorney here in Houston. I'm the legal director for Justice for Our Neighbors here. And I graduated from Rice in 2004. I was in Baker College. Hell yeah, to all my fellow Bakerites. And I spent 4 years in private practice and then came to Houston about 6 years ago, or came back to Houston. And yeah, I'm happy to talk to you guys today and look forward to hearing from you.
Thanks, Joy. Michael?
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Excited to be a part of the panel. I graduated from Rice in 2016. I am not yet a lawyer yet, but I will be one day. I'm currently a second-year evening student at Georgetown, part-time, and I work full-time as a government contractor for the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency as a law clerk for their general counsel's office. So I'm excited to be here. I'm looking forward to a wonderful conversation.
Thanks, Michael. Me too. And then finally, Jamila.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. I'm Jamila Mensah. I am Sid Rich, class of 2000, officially the oldest person on this panel by a ways. So thanks for that. I was an English major at Rice, and then I loved Rice so much that I stayed and worked in the admission office for 3 years after I graduated, before then going to law school at UT. And so the longest amount of time I've been out of Houston, born and raised here, was 3 years in Austin, and then immediately came right back. So practice in Houston. I'm a partner at Norton Rose Fulbright in the Employment and Labor Group. So my practice is traditionally a courtroom trial practice, but I do a lot of advice and counsel when clients need to hire or fire someone or do policies or trainings, investigations. I do all sorts of stuff. So it's a good mix of being in the courtroom and not being in the courtroom, which is what I really like about it. And I've been doing that since I got out of law school. Norton Rose Fulbright is my third firm. I started my career at Aiken Gump in Houston, moved to Hunton Williams, which is now Hunton Andrews Kurth. And then about, 7 years in June, moved to Norton Rose Fulbright, and just a partner in what is now a gigantic global firm, and really enjoying that experience. So happy to answer any questions and talk about all of that with you today.
Awesome. So very excited. And if it's okay with y'all, I'll start with some questions about your experience at Rice itself. So this question and most of them will be directed at all of the panelists. And we can start off with, when you were at Rice, what resources and centers did you find most helpful as a pre-law student or as whatever else you were at Rice? So feel free to jump in.
I'll jump in on that just because, unlike you folks who clearly have more direction and focus than I did, I had no idea that I was going to go to law school when I was at Rice. It was something that I thought about a little bit my senior year, but even then it took me a few more years to actually decide officially. So the resources that I used the most formally were those in the English department, because I thought that I was going to go on to graduate school. So I was really connected with professors and advisors in the English department. And then informally, just talking like you all are doing now, talking to people who were doing things that I thought were interesting or who were on the path to doing something interesting, and really getting feedback, attending as many, panels and study breaks and anything that I could attend where Rice alums or people were talking about what they did with their lives after they graduated. I found that to be immensely helpful, literally from the horse's mouth, about what you could do with a Rice education. So those were the resources I utilized the most.
I would say for me, either the kind of the pre-law resources at Rice either weren't as developed when I was there as they seem to be now, or they were and I didn't realize it because I didn't really utilize any kind of pre-law resources. I would say my biggest sources, just generally as I thought about what to do next at Rice, or the sociology department. I knew I didn't want to go to graduate school, but I still thought, comprehensive reading and knowing how to write appropriately would be useful in a range of places. And so I worked a lot with professors in that department, and I worked in that department a little bit as a TA. So they were definitely a huge source for me. And then I took a college class called Intro to Law that was through Lovett College. I don't know if it's still going on, but I took that class and I found that really helpful. The professor, I cannot remember his last name, but his first name is Rudy. He taught very typical law school style. So it was very rigorous. There was a lot of reading. There was the Socratic method. And I think having that experience in his classroom helped prepare me for kind of that same model once I went to law school the next year. And then just generally, of course, the BSA was a big source for me. Maybe not career directionally, but that was more Black alumni, but of course, a good source to talk through where I thought I might be going after I graduated.
Yeah, and I'll just add, I definitely took as many pre-law or law-related courses as I could at Rice. And because I knew I was interested in practicing law on some international scale, I decided to study abroad. So I definitely took advantage of the study abroad office and spent a semester away in Cuba. So if you have the opportunity to do any type of study abroad, I would highly recommend that.
Yeah, and just to follow on that, I majored in sport management, and at least during my time, the curriculum there offered 3, I think, really innovative courses. So there was a sport law, sport mediation, and a practicum course that I was able to participate in that sort of propelled my thinking into becoming a lawyer eventually. And I also participated in the Rice Judicial Program internship, which included, I believe, an externship study abroad opportunity with London as well. So I think hopefully those things still exist, because for me, they were pretty valuable, for me at least.
Yeah, for sure, very helpful. And it seems like maybe a common thread is that no one really had it figured out at Rice or in undergrad. And as you progressed through and even after you graduated, you were still deciding what you wanted. So could you talk a little bit about how you planned your career, or how you came to law school or came to wherever you decided?
Sure. I'll start. I started planning my career when I was 12 years old. And I know that sounds cheesy and cliche. I was not planning where I was going to law school, but I knew the reasons why I wanted to become an attorney. And it related to where I grew up and just some injustice I saw in the community. So when I went to undergrad, I always knew I was going to be pre-law. I knew I wanted to go to law school. And I knew I liked working with people, and I wanted to work with people from all over the world. And so when I went to law school, I did not know which area of law I wanted to focus on. I just knew I had this passion to work with people. I wanted to be some type of civil rights oriented attorney. And through law school, of course, you learn and you grow and you develop and kind of figure out what's going to work. When I was in undergrad, I worked for a law firm in downtown Houston that was not anything related to what I do now, but it gave me that exposure, that experience to see, okay, what is the practice of law? What is it going to look like for most attorneys? And so throughout law school, I kind of took coursework that I knew and did some internships and worked in law firms to kind of hone down my interest. And then ultimately, as soon as I graduated, I went straight into the practice of immigration law and private practice, and it's developed since that time.
I'll jump in next. So as I referred to earlier, my path was very indirect. So after senior year, I was still going through the grad school application process, but my heart was not in the grad school application process. And as a result, I was rejected through the grad school application process. It kind of all worked out that way. And so while I was working, I kept thinking, okay, I have this skill set that I know that I have in terms of what I'm capable of doing, what's interesting to me, what can I do with this? And it was actually my husband, who's also a Rice grad, who suggested that I consider law school, which was not something it just wasn't something I thought about. And so I started in the admission office. Each of us was assigned to different regions of the country. And so in my travels to recruit high school students, I would also visit whichever law schools happened to be in that town. And so when I went to Nashville, for example, I visited Vanderbilt, I visited Georgetown, and really just did the whole tour thing and learning about what it means to be a law student, sitting in on classes, that sort of thing. And I thought, okay, well, this sounds like something that I could do. And then early on in my first year of law school, well, I would say the summer after my first year of law school, my first clerking job in the summer was at a firm where you could do a ton of different things. They didn't have you, specifically in a particular group. And I just happened to come across an employment law assignment. And so when I figured out that I could have a litigation practice that was focused only on employment work, which it just felt very intuitive to me. It felt and still feels like something I'm just naturally inclined to understand and be helpful in. And from that first summer out of law school until now, that's all I've ever been focused on doing. That's all my practice has ever been. It's grown and shaped and in different ways, but it's always been an employment practice. And unlike a lot of my friends and like Joy and people who knew forever that they wanted to be an attorney, I didn't, but that hasn't stopped me from being able to do the things that I want to do. So I say that to say, if you have any uncertainty, I've been doing it 15 years now. Some would argue that I'm still uncertain on any particular day. So it really just, if you go and you do it and it doesn't work out, nothing is forever. You could always go and do something else. But if it's something that you're interested in, we definitely encourage you to pursue it, because had I not, I could have ended up doing something else, not realizing that this was actually a really good fit for me.
I think for me, the first time that I really started thinking about being a lawyer, because I came into Rice thinking I would be a veterinarian, which I don't know, I'm really bad at science, so I'm not really sure why I thought that would work. But I kind of realized that wasn't going to work pretty quickly, like probably my freshman year. And so as I started to think about maybe if law school was a good path for me, I guess I was just Googling and I found that there are summer for pre-law programs out there. And so I'm sure there are a ton of them now, but when I was applying, there was one at Florida State University and there was one, I believe, at the University of Nebraska. And I applied and got into the Florida State University program. And so that was like a 3-week kind of mimicking law school kind of thing. You got to meet Florida State alumni, learn about their career paths, and they were all kind of doing different things. And I felt like it was a really good level of exposure to what law school would be like, and that I could, at the very least survive the 3 years of law school. So that's how I kind of decided for sure to go to law school. While I was in law school, I didn't winnow down what I wanted to do like at all. The path that I kind of took was to go into kind of like big law. So go to a law practice that has a lot of different areas that, over maybe the course of my first or second year, I was hoping I could get to learn about different practices. So when I went into my law firm job at Vinson & Elkins, I was a complex commercial litigation associate, which kind of covers, at least at V&E, covers a big range of different types of practice. And so I got to try out white collar, I got to try out government contracts, and I obviously got to try out competition law, which I ended up really liking. it was a mix of really liking the practice and really liking and kind of connecting with a couple of the partners that did that work at that law firm. And that's how I landed into doing competition work. And I kind of have never looked back. And it's been a very, there's been a lot of variety in my career, even though I've stayed in this pretty small area, just because I've moved, I've had 3 different jobs. And so it looks a little different at each location.
Yeah, kind of similar to Jamila. When I got to Rice, I originally wanted to be an engineer, and quickly within 2 weeks found out that is not what I needed to be. But eventually, after kind of running a gamut of different courses and everything, and something that I said earlier, having the opportunity to take some courses about law and just kind of getting introduced to it that way, I thought, well, maybe this is actually something meant for me. And then eventually I was able to have my first internship with Catholic Charities, working with their immigration clinic on a couple of asylum cases. And that was when I immediately knew, this was something I wanted to do. I wanted to impact people's lives in a remarkable way. And I felt that, going to law school and eventually becoming a lawyer was the best way to do that, especially given the times we live in now. So although, you might come into Rice or wherever you are with uncertainty, you never know, by the end of the 4 years or however many years, you'll eventually come back to that, that goal of wanting to help people. And hopefully maybe it is becoming a lawyer.
Yeah, super interesting to hear about kind of how you all landed at law school. And I think we maybe even covered how you decided what area of law you're pursuing. So kind of related to that and staying on the topic of law school, I think a topic on a lot of people's minds is that they don't know the type of law they're interested in and they don't know if they have to. So how important is it, would you say, to know the type of law that you're interested in before applying to law school or even at the beginning of law school?
I would say really quickly, it's not, with the exception of a very few very specific narrow niche practices where certain schools just have a really good reputation for those practices, it isn't, in my opinion, that important. And actually what's probably more important in my estimation is where you want to live and practice. And outside of the top 10 schools, right? So the way that I see it is there are a number of schools, like Alicia with Harvard, she could practice, and going to Harvard doesn't limit where she can practice regionally. Going to Cornell or Columbia is not going to limit where you practice regionally. But when you start getting a little bit further down in the list, the majority of the schools, it starts to matter where you want to practice. So for example, when I was looking at schools, I knew I wanted to be in Texas, and to go to UT and practice in Texas was something that made perfect sense to me. If I thought that I wanted to practice in California, maybe I would have picked a different school. Maybe I would have picked a Stanford or wherever. So I think in my experience, unless it's very specific to, unless and there's some specialized practice area that law school does particularly well, the other considerations should be things like, obviously, the whether you want to go to a higher ranked school or how you feel about where the school falls in terms of rankings and that sort of thing, but where you want to live and where you ultimately think you're going to practice.
Yeah, I agree with that 100%. And I would say when it comes to the type of practice you want to do, you might even be better set up not knowing and not being narrowed down on what you want to do in law school, particularly if it's not based on you're experiencing people be lawyers in that area. I mean, I remember I went back to Harvard for a 1L job fair, and I had someone come up to me and say, I know for sure, I know what I want to do. I want to do property law. Property law isn't even a real practice. It's real estate. It's that's not what it's called outside of classes. And so obviously she didn't really have an understanding, and how could she, of what that was. And yet she was like, I'm definitely going to do this. And I think that happens to a lot of us. I think you don't really know the range of practices out there. You don't necessarily know what a practice looks like. There are some practices where you can't litigate at all. And maybe you think you can, but you're not going to. And so, there are a lot of things to learn along the way. And so I think in some ways, again, outside of the examples Jamila gave, where some schools are known for very good practices in certain areas, it is helpful to be able to gain that experience about a few areas you're interested in and make a more educated decision on which fits what you want to do and your skill set and so on.
Yeah, and I would just add that your first year of law school, you're going to get a prescribed script that every law school, every law student at first year, everybody's taking the same courses: constitutional law, torts, legal research, right? So you have a whole year to basically learn some things, but those exploration times are going to come through your summer internships and just clerking at law firms and things like that. And then you'll figure out pretty quickly the yay and nay of what you can and cannot do, or what you're not interested in. And even some people go to law school, they graduate and they decide they don't want to ever practice law and they might want to do something else. So I think that just comes with time. But going into law school, I had no idea that I would be an immigration attorney. I knew nothing about immigration law. I just said, oh, I'm going to work with families and civil rights on some level. I had no clue what that looked like. But certainly after a couple of summers, I figured that out.
Yeah, I'll just add, I think it's actually beneficial if you don't exactly know what you want to practice in. At least for me, I haven't known for a while what I wanted to do. And so when I moved to DC in the DMV area, one of the big practice areas is government contracting, which I had never even heard of before. But it's a very, very lucrative area of the law, and it's a big thing, especially in the DC area. So I would just say, when you're sort of looking into what law school you want to go to, think about where you want to live, whether or not you would like the area, and then also see if there are any specialized parts of law that are, particular for that particular geographic location.
Super interesting, and maybe even a little relieving for some of us. So thanks for sharing on that. Now, I think rewinding a little bit and thinking about when you were applying to law school, I think a lot of Rice students are debating whether to take a gap year, thinking about whether work experience would be helpful for them. So could you talk a little bit about sort of your thoughts on the gap year, and maybe if you had one, you had work experience, and how you felt like that factored into things?
I can take on this one.
Okay.
So when I originally applied, I was a senior in college, and kind of similar to Jamila's story, my heart wasn't necessarily in the application process. And so, as a result, got a lot of rejections from law schools that I wanted to go to, and kind of had to go back to the drawing board and say, okay, well, is this something I actually want to pursue? What can I do next to sort of confirm that and maybe open up some other employment options? So fortunately, after graduating, I was able to work for a small litigation firm in Houston. And then a year after that, I was able to move to DC and work for a big law firm named Covington & Burling as a paralegal. And so I'm glad that the first application cycle didn't work out, because it allowed my eyes to be opened to the opportunity of getting work experience and working with clients and getting, real world experience and seeing how things operated in a legal profession, as well as just being able to gain just personal integrity and characteristics about yourself. That way you could, have a beneficial career later on. And so eventually, 3 years later, I reapplied after taking the LSAT again. Fortunately, got into better schools. And then also, just one caveat that I didn't realize, I didn't know part-time law school was even a thing. And so I think a benefit of working after graduating college is that there's a possibility that you may not have to take out as many loans, if that's, an option for you, or you may be able to sort of balance, gaining the work experience in a particular field while also gaining the legal education. So I think those are just some things to consider instead of just rushing into the process. But I think either way you go, it could still work out just fine.
Yeah, I would second that. And I don't mean for my whole life to sound like a big accident, but I didn't know, because I didn't know that I was going to law school, I didn't realize that I was taking a gap year, right? Like that's how it happened. And it ended up like Michael, it ended up being 3 years because that's how long it took me to figure out what it was I wanted to do. I will say, hindsight is 2020. I have no idea what I would have been like in law school had I gone straight through. What I do know is I went at the exact right time for me, and having taken that time away from being a student for that period of time allowed me to remember how much I liked to learn and appreciated learning. Because especially that senior year, I was in a fellowship program, and so it was just reading and research and writing and all the time, and it just seemed like it was never going to end. And I think I just got to the point where I wasn't enjoying it anymore. And taking that time off showed me how much I missed it. I wanted to just go be somewhere and study something. Like I was missing that, and it took some space for me to be able to do that. And my approach to law school, I think, perspective wise, was different because I had taken that time off. I had that time off. So I had, in that time between graduating and going to law school, I got married. We owned a house. I didn't have any kids yet, but I was paying bills, like, real grown up stuff so by the time I got to law school, when people were freaking out about stuff, because everybody freaks out about everything in law school, just caveat. So when people were freaking out about whatever, I wasn't. It's like, okay, I know that if this doesn't work out, I will survive, right? Because I have lived, and I have, this is not the be all end all to my life. This one, day that I'm going to be on call to answer a question in comma is not going to be the end of my life. And just that perspective, I found that a lot of my classmates didn't have that. And so I had it, and I was able to share it with people. So there were some benefits to that for me. And the other thing too, I think I enjoyed law school a lot more because of that time off. So I ran track when I was at Rice. And so the schedule was 6 days a week of practice from the week before school started till right at, the end of the year, plus classes. Plus I worked all 4 years when I was in school as well, because I walked onto the track team. I wasn't a scholarship athlete. So all of that. So by the time I got to law school, and all I had to do was go to class and come home and study and be done. What do people do with all of this time? That was my sort of response to that. And I wouldn't have had any of that perspective, me personally, based on if I would have just gone straight through, from the level at which I was going by the time I graduated from college, straight into the intensity of law school. So it worked out in the right way for me to have that space in between.
Yeah, I didn't take any time off, and I kind of wish I would. In a kind of reverse situation of Jamila, I was planning on going to law school, and that's exactly what I did. And so I didn't take the 2 years off to see what else was out there. I mean, maybe I wouldn't have gone to law school had I seen that there was a world outside of being like a lawyer, a doctor, an engineer, which was like my understanding of the world, even after spending time at Rice. So I do think it's helpful. There are pros and cons to being in a job, in a like 9-to-5 job, and being a student. And like, you cannot see the pros and cons of either one very clearly if you don't have one of the experiences. So, when I graduated from law school, I was like, oh my gosh, I felt like I didn't appreciate being able to make my own schedule. I didn't appreciate being able to like take a nap in the middle of the day as long as I didn't have a class. Like, these are things that I couldn't appreciate while I was there. And then once I was in kind of a 9-to-5, I was like, oh, it would have been great if I could have appreciated it while I had it. I think one maybe positive thing about going straight through, and this is not going to be the case for everyone, but when I applied for law school, I had no income, and they consider your income, and if you're under 26, they consider your parents' income. So the only income that was considered was my mom's, and my mom was a teacher, so she's like solidly like real middle class. And so in the end, that's probably a better situation from a loans perspective than if I had worked and then they were counting my income and her income. And so I'm sure that was helpful. I still paid a ton in loans, but I got the most amount of grant money that I could. So that was a good outcome. And one other thing I'll say is, if you do know you want to go to law school and you don't want to take too much time off, there are lots of programs now where that's kind of the goal, or that's one piece of the goal of the program. And so Teach for America comes to mind. Like Teach for America is not, some people do stay teachers, obviously, in that career going through Teach for America, but to my understanding, the goal of the program is to teach for a short period of time and then go into the rest of the world and go make teaching better. And so there are a lot of people that go do Teach for America and then go to business school, go to Teach for America and go to law school. And it seems there's a very solid networking group of people that you gain before you even step foot into law school if you do one of those programs that's specifically made for that.
Yeah, before I went to law school, I was a teacher for 4 years in Houston, HISD. I taught 4th grade math and science, which is the complete opposite of what I do now. But I will say the benefit to having a career before law school is that I went into law school knowing exactly what this was my time, this is what I wanted to do. There are also skills that I gained in my previous career. If you can manage a group of 39 and 10-year-olds with different personalities and different skill sets and different attitudes, and their parents and the school administration, you can pretty much manage a legal career in law school. And so I kind of took those skills with me. Also, public speaking became normal. You know, trying to keep a straight face in front of giggling children can be challenging. And so taking that same skill into the work that I do now. And then, of course, like financially, it put me in a slightly better position, having had savings and whatnot before I went to law school, and just being used to managing my own budget and things like that. So that, I would say those are my advantages to not necessarily taking a gap year, but having a gap career.
And I'll just add one other thing. Some other people touched on it, but I wouldn't prioritize law school over what you want to do with your life. So for instance, before law school, you know, I moved to Arlington, Virginia. I got married, you know, we have an apartment. We like Jamila kind of referred to, you know, we lived life. So if there are, you know, trips or traveling that you want to do, and you're finding that that conflicts with law school, or if, you know, if being in a relationship with someone, or whatever you want to do, whatever you want to accomplish before law school, like law school can wait. It'll always be there. You can revisit it 5, 10, 20 years down the road. But don't feel like, you know, there's any pressure that you have to go immediately after graduating.
For sure. So thinking about maybe in law school now, for closing out that section, was there anything that you found sort of challenging or unexpected? And then a follow-up, are there any resources at Rice that you think students should take advantage of in preparation of that?
So challenges, I'll just say, one thing I will say, which is not a direct answer to your question, is that Rice prepares you in ways that I don't even think you fully appreciate while you're there, right? We all know it's hard, it's challenging. People tell you, parents tell you that all the time, and they tell their friends that and all of that, but the reality is it's true. And so just from a baseline ability to figure stuff out and get stuff done, you are being prepared for that with every single course that you take at Rice, whether you know it or not. So know and understand and appreciate that, because I don't think that's something you can really fully appreciate while you're in the moment. So that being said, you start law school, and law school is challenging no matter where you go. Some places I think are probably harder than others for other reasons, but it's challenging no matter where you go. You have the preparation that you need by the time you finish a place like Rice. Just know that. You know, I'm telling you that, and it's true, and just accept it from me. But once you actually get to law school, what I found to be most challenging, and I think I had a better time of it because UT, I think it's such a great place, is the feeling of sort of collegiality and sharing and all of that we fostered for all those years at Rice isn't always there when you go into something like law school. And in fact, the opposite can be true depending on where you go or who you're around. And so that was a little bit of a punch in the face for me, because I'm like, hey guys, like, let's hang out, let's talk, let's share our notes, let's, you know, all of the stuff that I did and who I am. And to realize that not everybody was like that was, you know, maybe I was naive but it was that was a bit of a shock to me. So once I got over that, finding my pockets, finding my people, just like I had to find my people at Rice, just like I had to find my people in my career, finding my people in law school is what changed that for me. And once I did that, once I found my cohort of people, that was it. That's what I needed, and to overcome that particular challenge. But that took me. I heard the stories, and I don't know why I just assumed it wasn't going to be true for me. But actually getting through and finding people who we were able to support each other through the process is what turned that around for me.
Yeah, I guess from my end with law school, what was challenging or probably the most surprising was the amount of reading that is involved, especially your first year of law school. I mean, there are nights where your professors are assigning reading and it's like 200 to 300 pages a night, and you have to regurgitate all that information and come back and get ready to speak about it. So that was challenging. Of course, in undergrad, you do a lot of reading as well, especially if you're a social science major. But I feel like law school was pretty hefty reading, and you have to be prepared for your professors to sometimes put you on the spot and just know what you read the night before if you were alert to pay attention to it. And then I guess to piggyback on what Jamila said about the supportive community that you guys have at Rice as students, I hope you really appreciate that. Law school, you'll find, of course, you'll have friends and they'll be great people. And some of my closest friends are from law school. My best friends, I would say, are still from Rice and undergrad. But, just finding that community within whatever law school you choose to go to, finding the people who have similar study habits and have similar goals and similar focus, I think would be critical as a law student. And then as far as like resources at Rice, I think another point that Jamila made, and I'll certainly support this, is just kind of tapping into people as resources. And I think one thing when I was a student, I never thought about this, like the people you're friends with at Rice and whatever college or whatever program, these are the future doctors, lawyers, engineers that you're going to know. You're going to be reading about these folks 10, 15, 20 years from now, and they're going to be your best friends, and it's going to be so cool. But you're also going to rely on those resources. So I get text messages and phone calls from other attorneys all the time, like, hey, can you tell me where my client can go for this? And I reach out to them for referrals too. So those resources come from people that you meet even in the undergraduate level that someday will be even more tremendous resources.
I can jump in here just to say one thing I struggle with a lot in law school. Well, first of all, because I didn't take time off, I definitely had burnout, like Jamila was explaining. I was it was, even though I was switching from a way busier schedule, because I wasn't an athlete, but I did work. And so I did go from school and work to just school, but it was still just overwhelming. I think I needed a break and I didn't get one. And so that was tough. One other thing I struggled with a lot was you do not get feedback throughout your semester. And I relied a lot on feedback in the sociology department, which was where most of my classes were. I would like pre-write papers and the professors would edit them for me, which was something they would do for anyone. But like you just get no feedback. Like in most of your classes, it's one test at the end and that's it. And I struggled a lot with that because I couldn't tell if I was doing a good job. It was just that you just don't have any barometers to like figure out if you're doing good. So I adjusted, but it was really hard my first semester. And it's also hard because in your first year, that's when your grades are the most important. And so it's like, I have no idea how I'm going to do, but this is going to, to Jamila's, I mean, I'm sure Jamila wasn't freaking out as much because she had real life experience, but I was like, my life is going to be over if I get a bad grade at the end. So which was not true. I definitely got a couple of bad grades and I'm still kicking. So yeah, that not having that feedback was really tough.
Yeah, I think the only thing I'll add is the biggest challenge for me is just dealing with the overall level of stress and anxiety, not only from yourself, but from other students overall. And like Alicia said, there are no sort of midpoint assessments to know how well you're absorbing anything or to know whether or not you're learning the material in the way that you need to. And there is usually just, one big final where, you apply whatever 12 weeks of, a 1,000-page book in this, compressed 3-hour exam, which is tough. And I don't think there's not a situation or training that you can do to prepare yourself for that. But I think it's just sort of getting to a point where you know that you can be confident within your preparation tactics and building in some sort of process for yourself to check in, with the material, with your professor throughout the semester, and to sort of counteract that, lack of feedback that you'll likely experience.
For sure, definitely helpful. So one last question, sort of transitioning to after law school, could you talk a little bit about the process for job opportunities and deciding what sort of job you want to take after law school? And also if there's any advice you have for networking or even using the Rice Alumni Network in that process?
Yeah, I'll jump in on this, kind of on Alicia's point. So this has changed over the years, the number of firms that hire students in the summer after their first year versus their second year. It has really fluctuated. But back in my day, there were these really substantially large first year summer programs. I mean, these firms were just inviting, this is so my first year of law school, for frame of reference, was 2003 to 2004. And so the summer of 2004 is what I'm talking about. And this was, for anybody who knows any history about, especially these big law firms, it kind of tracked with the economy. So everything was big and they were throwing money at people and all this stuff was happening at these big firms until 2008, and the bottom fell out of the thing. And now they're, starting all over again. So anyway, that was at the time when the thing to do, if you were interested in big law firms, was just to get your job that first summer. Your job that first summer was going to probably lead to your job the second summer. Second summer was going to take you to where you would go after law school. And so law, unlike a lot of other professions, especially if you go the firm route, even if it's a mid-sized firm, if you go the sort of corporate firm route, it's one of the only professions that before you're even halfway done with school, practically, where you're going to be spending the beginning of your career, which is just an odd thing. It's just an odd setup. And sometimes it works out and sometimes it doesn't. So anyway, my first semester, because first semester you're done and all you have is whatever grades have come in by the time they're trying to interview you for the summer. And I was in a situation where I had 3 pretty good grades. One hadn't come in yet. So I had all these firms saying, okay, well, let's, we think we want you, but let's wait and see what your last, how your grades round up. We think we want you, but let's wait and see. We can't commit. And so last grade came in and it was the worst of all the grades, right? And so, which was a gut punch on a number of levels, not least of which is having graduated from Rice. That's not at all what I expect for myself. So then though, the rejection letter started coming in, right? Then it's like, oh, nope, sorry, like offers off the table. I mean, like Harry Potter style through the door, just like with a swiftness, they were coming in. And there was one firm that said, it's not, not exactly what we would take, but we actually really like you, so we want you to come anyway. I went from having probably 10 or 15 potential offers for that first summer to that one. And I went to that one firm who happened to have Rice grads throughout the firm. And the hiring partner at the time was a Rice grad, years and years older than me. We had never met other than the interview process. But I, to this day, believe that Rice thing was at least a little bit a part of him, what he thought was taking a chance on me, for me to be able to take on that gig. Getting that gig, I didn't even end up going back there to work permanently, but it did position me to be able to have work experience that summer, which led to where I went the second summer and so on. And so all of that to say I knew that I wanted to join a firm. I knew that early on. And then once I figured out I wanted to do employment law, I started targeting firms that had employment law within a bigger law firm environment. So my search was limited that way. But it was this close to not going at all the way I thought it was going to go. And so to look back at that now, from where I sit now, that is, I remember it. And it's the kind of thing that I keep in my head when I'm interviewing law students now in my position, when I'm advising folks about what your options are, because the big law firm business in particular can seem very restrictive, and it can seem very like you don't get second chances. And a lot of people don't, especially a lot of people of color. That's a conversation for another day. But it sometimes you have to take the chance that you get. And all of the hard work, everything I did, all of the, sweat and tears and all this that I put into it, and it still also required this sort of aligning of the planets for the thing to go the way that I wanted it to go. So, that I don't mean that to be encouraging or discouraging. I think it's just, realistic explanation of all you can do is what you can do, and eventually have confidence that you're going to end up where you want to be. That was my personal experience.
But my experience was also applying purely in kind of the corporate law firm direction. So I won't add too much here. I also, my first year was 2007 or 2008 to 2009. So it was a uniquely bad experience that I hope none of you will go through because of the Great Recession. But my first year I ended up working in the general counsel's office at the Department of Education in DC. And I purely did that because I had like some level of an interest in education. And I thought it would be fun to work there because, this was summer 2009. So this was right after Obama had been elected, and he said a lot about how he wanted to change education law. So I thought it would be an interesting environment to work in. And I thought the skill set that I would get there would be make it easy to sell myself to a law firm once I was in those interviews, which, followed right after that summer. And then when I did my interviews, I did what our career office told us to do, which was apply as many places as you can and apply in two cities, like your city you really want to work in and your safe city, because there was a lot going on. I don't know if that's necessary outside of a Great Recession, but that's kind of what was going on when I graduated. That was, the more places you apply, obviously you want to apply places that you're actually interested in. But if you have, a robust OCI process at your school, I don't see why you wouldn't kind of spread your eggs as far as you can, I guess. But yeah, I think for the first year, there weren't that many first year law firm opportunities when I was in school. And so the next best, that's the best thing to do, I think, if you want to go the corporate law firm route. But the next best thing, I think, is to think about what skill set you're going to be able to gain from your 1L summer. It might be also a good opportunity to establish that you want to live somewhere that you have no connection to. Outside of New York, I experienced this when I applied to DC. You get a lot of questions about like, why do you want to be here? Do you have family here? Have you lived here before? Because they don't really want to invest in someone who's going to like run for the hills after they finish paying their loans off. And so I, having worked in DC my 1L summer, I was able to say, well, I worked here. I've lived here for at least 3 months and I liked it. And here are some things I liked about it. So it can be useful for both skill set and establishing where you want to live if you don't already have a connection.
Yeah, and I agree with everything Alicia and Jamila have already said. I remember Alicia and I graduated from law school at the same time, 2011. And the market was just horrendous. My classmates, a lot of people were just unable to find those big law firm jobs. I was not personally interested in big law, but I knew I wanted to be in a firm, mid-size, and focused on particular areas. And so I interviewed at the firm I got hired in Dallas, when I'm a Dallas native. And I remember on the interview, they were looking for somebody who had way more experience. Like, I'm fresh out of law school. I have hardly any real experience, right? And so the partner said, oh, I see you went to Rice. And Chiching, that was a check on his box. He was a Georgetown graduate and he loved the fact that I went to Rice. He knew I was going to be smart. And then he saw that I studied abroad in Cuba and he was of Cuban ancestry. So it's not formal networking, but I would say the Rice network will work in your favor when you get to that point. And even in my position now, where I do hire attorneys and interns and legal staff and so forth, I have specifically hired a Rice alum and I have worked with Rice interns. And anytime I see a Rice candidate coming through the door, I'm going to be excited about that. And I think that kind of carries throughout the network.
And can I just jump in real quick to say, I think that applies tenfold when you're outside of Texas. Like we're rare, right? Like we're a small school. So to find someone outside of Texas, if you can find a Rice person there, I mean, I think you have a real advantage. It's a really good networking tool.
Yeah, so I won't touch on OCI because I haven't gone through that yet. But I will say that, and this is not hyperbole, but every single internship and job opportunity I've had has been the extension of a Rice connection. And so even all the internships that I had through our college were either through a connected, professor or an alum, just someone within the Rice community. And even making the jump to DC, that was still through an attorney who I had worked for, who had a connection in that particular office. And also in my current job, with the ultimate Rice connection, my wife, who is a Rice alum, and she originally was working for the company that I work for now. And so I think it's just, if you take anything away from this discussion, I think definitely value your relationships and grow your network as far, as deep, and as wide as possible, because 6 degrees of separation, like there's always going to be a likelihood, no matter where you are, that someone's going to know someone, and that person's going to know someone. And people have said today, sometimes they may just give you an opportunity just because you're within that connection.
Yeah, that's super cool to hear about the extent of the Rice network. And I think maybe although our collegial and collaborative environment can't be extended everywhere, hopefully in some ways it can still continue. So with that, I think we're going to transition to some of the questions from the audience. And since we're running a little tight on time, maybe if we could have 1 or 2 people answer these questions. Obviously, if you have something that you think is important, feel free to say it. So the first question from Cordy, thank you for submitting, is how would you describe your law school experience as a Black first-generation student? And then sort of follow-ups, did you ever feel out of place or encounter any sort of imposter syndrome? And how did you deal with this? So anyone feel free to jump in.
I'll jump in on that. The answer is yes to all of the above. So again, I think Rice helped with some of that because it just sort of getting comfortable in my own skin and with my own story and what it meant to have gotten there differently than the other people got there. Having gone through that already was helpful. Getting to law school, though, was a little bit different because, any lawyers, present company excluded, they can be ridiculous. I mean, they can just insist upon themselves in a way that is super annoying. And that starts in law school. And so when it starts with this sort of like, oh, well, all of these people I know are lawyers, and I come from a long line of whatever. And, you try to say, I don't care about any of that. None of that matters to me. But then what you start to see, or what I started to see, was that they seem to have more information about law school and the process and everything than I did because of these connections and because of this, their access to this stuff. And so that was jarring, and there was a bit of imposter syndrome in terms of how can I possibly compete when these folks are already so much further ahead in terms of who they know and what they know and all of these things. And the only way I found to get through that is just to get through it. You meet as many people as you can, and you learn what you can. You ask tons of questions. You can't ever be afraid to ask questions. That's the way I've lived my life. That's the way I run my career. And that's what has been successful to me, is to always ask. Don't be afraid to ask. And then to Alicia's point and Michael's point and Joy's point, don't be afraid to use the resources that you do have. Maybe I didn't have anybody in my family that went to law school, but I certainly knew some people from Rice who went to law school. I had friends who were in businesses with people who went to law school. And so I tapped into my resources, my extended resources outside of what I didn't, what I wasn't born into or born with. And so, I won't say it was a hindrance, and I won't say it was a challenge any more than those sorts of things can be a challenge on any regular basis. But also I will say, like anything else, it gives me a perspective and will always will, to be able to appreciate the opportunity and the experiences that I do have, and to not take them for granted, to make sure that I, exercise my full potential in all things, because I know none of this came easy for me.
Does anyone else want to add? If not, we can go on to another audience question. Okay, thank you for sharing that, Jamila. I think very helpful. Another question from Jan, speaking a little bit about funding law school, which I think we have broached the topic a few times. Are there specific resources available other than loans that students should pursue or that you've had experience with?
Well, I will say from my personal experience, when I chose to go to Tulane for law school, it was post-Katrina, and the city of New Orleans was recruiting young professionals to come to New Orleans for law school. I didn't know anything about living in New Orleans, but I figured it's on the Gulf Coast, it's close enough to Houston. I want to go back to Houston at some point, so I'll go to law school in New Orleans. And the reason why I specifically chose is because they gave a huge amount of money out in scholarships to recruit law students. So that worked in my favor. To get those large sum scholarships. Aside from that, it was also just compensated with loans smaller than a normal law student would have to incur. But sometimes there are scholarships available, especially for first generation law students, African American, Black law students. Sometimes just depending on what part of the US you come from, if you're from a more rural area, there might be funding available for that. And occasionally there are also grants that exist. So I would say explore all of your options for funding. When I went to law school, I was like, hey, look, I'm trying to get out of this as painless as possible financially. So you do have to think about that ahead of time, but seek out the free money where it exists before you have to look into loans.
Yeah, and just piggybacking on that, if it's something that you really want to do and debt is something that you have to take on to do it, then that's a life decision like anything else. I had grants and loans to get through Rice, and I worked, and then I had grants and loans to get through law school, and I worked. So you do what you have to do, and it's not saying any of that is easy. I am still paying off a combination of like leftover Rice and some UT, because I've deliberately put it off forever. Like I got a job focused on one of my areas of focus when I was looking for a job is what was going to be able to sustain me financially, be able to pay off this debt, whatever. And so it's not something that causes me to lose any sleep, because there was never going to be a way for me to get through higher education without owing somebody money. I mean, that just based on my family background, I knew that was going to be the case. So I got comfortable with it. That being said, I know it can be egregious, and that's why things like going to law school those decisions shouldn't be taken lightly, because you don't want to put yourself in a position where you feel oppressed by the decision that you've made to take on all this debt. So it is something that you should all be thinking about at every step in the process, and really doing the math on what makes sense, especially when you know what you want to do after you get out of school.
For sure. So the last audience question I think we'll cover for now is from Trey. Was it hard to find a job in law that you were interested in and happy with, especially considering that people say the market for lawyers can be oversaturated?
I think this area is one where, to Jamila's point, you really want to think about where you want to practice and where you go to school. Even in the Great Recession, I don't think me and my colleagues, we felt it, but I don't think we felt it as strongly as other schools probably did, because we were in the top 10. And I'm sure like UT graduates felt the same way about getting jobs in Texas and so on. They're kind of, the top maybe 10 or 14 plus the top schools in each state have a little bit of protection around that in terms of the saturation. Outside of that, it can get, I'm sure it can get a little difficult depending on what you're trying to do. Again, I'm really coming from a big law like angle of thought. So So I did have friends that were not able to get big law jobs though from Harvard. So I'm in the Great Recession. So it was very tough. But yeah, I mean, I was really just trying to get a job where I could pay my loans off. I wasn't really thinking about being happy, not directly out. It was just hammered in my head that I'd be working. Like, I remember before I started my job, I told all my loved ones, like, you might not hear from me because I might be just working and sleeping. And that's not what ended up happening, but that's what I thought was going to happen. So because that was what I thought was going to happen, I didn't think much about happiness. But I will say, even if you do, go somewhere for some reason outside of being happy, I think over the course of your career, it's definitely something you can navigate, and you can get to a place where you're happy and doing a practice that you like, as long as you're open-minded and you keep looking for whatever it is you're not getting at your current position.
Yeah, super helpful. And I think we'll all have that drive, so hopefully it'll work out. Thanks everyone for submitting questions. Unfortunately, we don't have the time to get to all of them, but you'll have the opportunity to ask them in the breakout rooms if you would like. So I'm just going to hand it back to Alexa to talk a little bit about those breakout rooms, and I'll also drop a link in the chat if you want to be on the Pre-Law Society listserv and are not yet.